There comes a point in every sincere seeker's life where the ground beneath them begins to crumble, not physically, but existentially. Everything that once defined them starts to dissolve, often without warning, and they are left standing in the ruins of what used to be called me. This moment marks the beginning of what can only be described as the death of the old self. It is not a literal death, yet it feels like one, sometimes even more painful, because it dismantles everything we thought we were. For years, perhaps lifetimes, the human being builds an identity out of memory, belief, achievement, and attachment. It is a structure carefully crafted by conditioning, a college of family expectations, societal definitions, and inner desires. We call it a personality, but it is more like armor. It keeps us safe, predictable, and accepted. Yet, it also keeps us confined within the limits of that constructed image. When awakening begins, that armor starts to crack. The light of consciousness seeps through, revealing that what we thought was self was merely a temporary costume. This moment is terrifying because the ego, the psychological sense of I, interprets this unraveling as annihilation. It resists with all its strength, clinging to roles, labels, and identities to avoid facing the vast emptiness beneath them. The mind screams for meaning, the heart aches for familiarity, and the body trembles at the unknown. It feels as though everything is falling apart, relationships, ambitions, even spiritual beliefs. But what's truly dying is not life itself, it is the illusion of who we believed ourselves to be. When the old self begins to die, the world starts to lose its color. The things that once brought joy, achievements, possessions, recognition, suddenly seem lifeless. It's not that the world has changed, it's that you are no longer looking through the same lens. The old self lived for validation, for control, for a story in which it could be the hero or the victim. But when consciousness awakens, those stories dissolve, and the ego no longer finds nourishment in them. What remains is silence, a silence so deep it feels like the death of everything meaningful. This inner death is not a mistake, it is an essential passage. To awaken is to outgrow the limited identity you once called me. The ego is a necessary stage in human evolution. It gives structure and direction. But at some point, it becomes too small for the vastness of who you truly are. Like a seed that must break open for the tree to emerge, the ego must crack for consciousness to bloom. But in that breaking, there is chaos. The seed cannot imagine the tree. The old self cannot imagine life without itself. Many who reach this point feel lost, disoriented, even betrayed by spirituality itself. They expected awakening to bring peace, bliss, or certainty, but instead it brings emptiness. Yet this emptiness is sacred. It is the cleansing fire that burns away falsehood. It is the space where the old identity dissolves and a deeper awareness begins to take form, one that no longer depends on thought, belief, or external meaning. In this stage, silence becomes the teacher, solitude becomes the medicine, life begins to unfold without explanation. The death of the old self often shows up in subtle ways. A person may suddenly lose interest in the things that used to define them, their career, ambitions, or social image. Friendships may fade, not out of anger, but out of energetic mismatch. Old habits lose their appeal, not because of moral discipline, but because they no longer feel alive. There is an invisible shedding, a gradual withdrawal from what is inauthentic. The person may appear detached or even apathetic, but in truth, They are learning to exist without masks. At first, this detachment feels cold. The ego interprets it as numbness, but it is actually spaciousness, the space in which something new can be born. It is the sacred void that ancient mystics called the dark night of the soul, a place where meaning dies so that truth can be seen without distortion, a place where the personality surrenders and pure being remains. In this phase, grief often arises, grief for the loss of identity, for the people who no longer understand you, for the dreams that no longer feel relevant. But this grief is not a regression, it is purification. Every tear washes away a piece of illusion. Every loss reveals something eternal. What dies is what was never real to begin with. The mask, the name, the story. The mind cannot comprehend this process. It keeps trying to rebuild the old self, to recreate the comfort of certainty, to attach to new identities. The spiritual one, the awakened one, the wise one. But even these identities must die. Awakening has no final form. It is a continuous dying into truth. Each time the self reforms, it must dissolve again, because the essence of awakening is freedom, and freedom cannot coexist with identification. The death of the old self is not a single event. It unfolds in waves. Sometimes it feels gentle, like a quiet sunset. Other times it is violent, like a storm tearing through the inner world. There are moments of clarity followed by confusion, peace followed by despair. The human mind cannot sustain constant awareness of the infinite, so it oscillates between light and shadow until it stabilizes in presence. Through this oscillation, the remnants of the old identity slowly disintegrate. And as the old self continues to die, something subtle begins to emerge, not a new identity, but a quiet sense of being. It does not need a name. It does not seek validation. It does not care to prove or defend itself. It simply is. This beingness was always there, hidden beneath layers of conditioning, waiting for the noise to fade. But to experience it directly, the old self must completely burn away. The fire of awareness consumes everything unreal, leaving only the essence that cannot die. Before awakening, most people live within a framework of borrowed meaning, a carefully assembled map of beliefs, roles, and expectations that tell them who they are and why they exist. This borrowed meaning is inherited, not discovered. It comes from parents, culture, religion, and social conditioning. It defines success and failure, love and loss, good and bad. It gives the illusion of stability. But awakening, by its very nature, tears through this structure like lightning through a web of lies. When consciousness expands beyond the boundaries of conditioning, the external systems that once gave life coherence begin to collapse, and what follows is a deep existential void. For much of human life, meaning is externalized. It is projected onto objects, people, and institutions. A person finds purpose in career, identity in nationality, comfort in faith, and validation in relationships. These become the scaffolding upon which the fragile ego builds its sense of worth. Society reinforces this structure by rewarding conformity, by praising those who fit the mold, who follow the script, who believe in the same collective illusions. Yet this external meaning system, however comforting, is inherently unstable because it depends on things that are temporary. The moment one begins to see through this, a quiet disillusionment begins. Awakening exposes the fragility of every borrowed belief. The roles that once felt sacred, employee, spouse, citizen, believer, begin to lose their grip. The individual realizes that these were not truths but agreements, constructs sustained by unconscious repetition. What was once the foundation of identity now feels like a prison. The values that once seemed absolute, achievement, approval, reputation, start to feel hollow. The music of the world continues, but the awakened one can no longer dance to its rhythm. This collapse is not a choice. It is an inevitable consequence of seeing clearly. The external systems of meaning thrive on separation. The idea that you are a fragment in need of completion. That fulfillment lies outside yourself, that you must strive to become something more. Awakening reveals the illusion behind this game. It shows that everything you sought outside was merely a reflection of what was already within. But once this is seen, the old motivations die. The pursuit loses its flavor. The external meaning system, stripped of its hypnotic power, disintegrates under the light of awareness. The mind, unprepared for such vast emptiness, panics. It tries to rebuild. It searches for new ideologies, new teachers, new movements to belong to. But each reconstruction collapses faster than the last because the awakened consciousness can no longer believe in borrowed truth. The external meaning systems, religion, politics, morality, even spirituality itself, lose their authority. They once offered direction. Now they feel like echoes of a world that never truly existed. When this collapse happens, it feels as though the ground has disappeared. There is no certainty to hold on to, no framework to interpret experience. The individual enters a liminal space, a psychological wilderness where all external references dissolve. In this wilderness, one confronts the terrifying possibility that life has no inherent meaning at all. The mind, which once relied on stories to sustain its purpose, faces silence. The heart, which once drew strength from belonging, faces aloneness. This silence and aloneness are not punishments, they are revelations. They expose how dependent the human psyche has been on external validation to feel real. The collapse of external meaning is not a gentle process. It often begins with confusion and despair. People describe it as a spiritual depression or dark night of the soul. The familiar structures of life lose coherence. Ambitions feel absurd. Relationships shift in energy. Conversations that once felt engaging now feel mechanical. Even language itself begins to lose its power to express truth. The awakened mind perceives the emptiness behind words, behind rituals, behind every collective symbol that once carried weight. For many, this collapse feels like death. It is the death of belief, the death of certainty, the death of the illusion that something out there can complete the human experience. The external systems crumble because they were never real to begin with. They were reflections of the collective psyche, not expressions of absolute truth. Once consciousness withdraws its investment from these illusions, the entire structure loses vitality. It no longer holds power because the source of its power, your belief, has been reclaimed. In this space of disillusionment, the ego fights to survive. It searches for substitutes, new philosophies, new relationships, new identities to restore meaning. But each attempt feels shallower than the last. The external world, once so alive with promise, now reveals its impermanence. Even beauty begins to shift. It no longer resides in objects or ideals, but in the pure awareness observing them. The meaning that once seemed external now hides behind everything, subtle, elusive, silent. This stage is often misunderstood as nihilism. It is not the denial of meaning, it is the exposure of false meaning. The collapse of external systems does not destroy truth, it clears the ground for it. But before this clearing feels liberating, it feels devastating. The person who experiences it may withdraw, feeling detached from society, unable to engage in the collective game. What they are really doing is detoxing from illusion. The psyche is recalibrating itself, no longer powered by external validation, but by inner awareness. During this time, one might look at the world and see its absurdity, the endless striving, the competition, the obsession with image and success. What once seemed normal now appears like theater, performed by people asleep to their own divinity. The awakened one no longer belongs to that play, yet cannot fully escape it. They move through the world like a ghost between two realities. One that is collapsing and one that is yet to be born. The collapse of external meaning systems strips life of its familiar context, revealing it as raw, unfiltered existence. Without roles, rules, or promises, everything stands naked. This nakedness feels unbearable at first because it confronts the human tendency to hide behind purpose. But slowly, as the dust settles, there is an unspoken understanding that meaning is not something given. It is something revealed through direct experience. The outer world ceases to define the inner one. The maps burn, and for the first time, there is only the vast, uncharted territory of being. There is a strange and silent space that opens after awakening, a space that feels neither like the world you left behind nor the one you were promised. It is the in-between, the vast psychological and spiritual desert that stretches between illusion and realization. It does not announce itself with clarity or peace. It arrives as disorientation. The person who once thought they knew who they were suddenly feels suspended in a kind of nothingness. The ground that once held meaning has disappeared, but the sky of new understanding has not yet formed. This is the void between worlds, the threshold where the old self has died and the new self has not yet taken root. In this space, everything that used to feel solid becomes transparent. The mind, which once found comfort in definitions, now struggles to find anything it can hold on to. The world continues as it always did. People laugh, work, argue, plan, yet something in you watches it all with a detached stillness as if from another dimension. You see the mechanical nature of life, the repetition, the masks, the endless seeking. But instead of judging, you simply feel a quiet sadness, a kind of mourning for the dream that no longer holds you. The void feels like a place of exile. You no longer belong to the unconscious world, but you have not yet integrated into the awakened one. The structures of the past, your beliefs, attachments, ambitions, lie shattered, but there is nothing new to replace them. You exist in a kind of limbo, a spiritual purgatory where every attempt to rebuild identity feels false. You may try to return to the familiar, to force yourself into old roles, but they no longer fit. You may try to accelerate your evolution, to grasp new teachings or rituals, but they no longer satisfy. It is as though life itself has withdrawn meaning, leaving you face to face with raw existence, silent, vast, and indifferent. In this void, time behaves differently. Days can feel endless, and moments can stretch into eternity. The usual motivations dissolve. There is no drive to chase, no hunger to achieve, no craving to prove. Yet, paradoxically, this absence of movement can feel unbearable. The ego, stripped of its roles, feels like it is dying a slow death, and it fights for survival by trying to create new distractions, new identities, new purposes. But none of them stick. The void rejects all fabrication. It accepts only stillness. The in-between is not a punishment, it is purification. It burns away the remnants of illusion that the initial awakening did not reach. It dismantles every subtle layer of ego that still seeks control, recognition, or meaning. The person who passes through this space learns the art of surrender, not as a concept, but as necessity. There is no way out of the void through effort. Effort only deepens the suffering. The only way is through still awareness, through allowing everything to dissolve without interference. Many describe this stage as numbness, a feeling of being disconnected from life, of watching reality unfold as if through glass. Emotions lose their intensity. The highs and lows flatten into a quiet monotone. Even beauty feels distant, unreachable. The world continues, but you are not entirely in it. You float between dimensions, one that no longer holds you, and one that has not yet embraced you. This is why the void feels so alien. It is the dissolution of duality without the full realization of unity. During this time, silence becomes both a companion and a tormentor. There are no answers here, only presence. The spiritual mind that once searched for truth realizes that truth cannot be sought. The seeker dissolves, and with it dissolves the illusion of progress. There is only being, pure, unadorned, unexplainable. Yet the human aspect struggles against it. The heart longs for warmth, for purpose, for connection, while the soul whispers that there is nothing to seek. This tension between the human and the divine is what defines the void between worlds. The void tests every attachment to identity. Even the desire to be awakened must die here. The very idea of spiritual progress collapses. It is here that you confront the deepest paradox, the realization that there is nowhere to go, yet something profound is happening beneath the surface. It is like winter in the soul, barren, still lifeless on the surface, but beneath the frozen soil, new roots are forming. The mind cannot see this, so it interprets the stillness as emptiness. But this emptiness is not absence, it is gestation. Something unseen is taking shape in the silence. The void strips away comfort. It removes every external source of validation, every spiritual concept that once promised peace. It leaves you naked before existence itself. There is no philosophy to cling to, no practice to perform, no image of enlightenment to chase. In this space, the only truth is the immediacy of being, breath, awareness, the faint pulse of life moving through emptiness. It is not exciting or dramatic. It is subtle, almost invisible, yet profoundly alive beneath the surface. For some, the void feels like a kind of spiritual death. The personality fades, the mind quiets, and the sense of self becomes translucent. There is no longer a clear I to narrate experience. Thoughts arise and dissolve without ownership. Feelings pass through like wind through an open field. Even the distinction between inner and outer begins to blur. Yet, amidst this dissolution, a quiet intelligence watches. It does not interfere or judge, it simply observes. This witnessing presence is not new. It has always been there, hidden beneath the noise of identity. The void reveals it by removing everything else. This stage can last days, months, or even years. It cannot be rushed, because it is not a process of doing, but of undoing. The more the mind tries to escape, the more it prolongs the experience. The void asks for total surrender, not as resignation, but as trust. Trust that something unseen is unfolding. Trust that the silence is not emptiness, but space. Trust that the loss of meaning is the clearing of ground for a new way of being to emerge. To live in the void is to live without map or compass. There is no clear direction, no external guidance, no certainty to hold. Yet in this absence, life begins to whisper in new ways, not through words or teaching, but through subtle intuition, through quiet presence, through the direct experience of existence itself. The mind does not understand this language, but the heart slowly begins to recognize it. It is the faint pulse of being, the quiet rhythm that has been beneath everything all along. After the initial awakening, after the shock, the emptiness, and the dismantling of identity, there comes a quieter, more elusive stage, integration. It is not dramatic like awakening, nor as disorienting as the void. It is subtle, slow, and profoundly human. In this phase, one learns to live again, not as the old self, not as an idea of the enlightened one, but as a conscious being in an ordinary world. The integration phase is where realization meets reality, where spirit descends into flesh, where truth begins to take form in daily life. Awakening shows you what is real. Integration teaches you how to embody it. Many mistake awakening as the end of the journey, but it is only the threshold. The collapse of illusion reveals truth, but truth must now find its expression in thought, emotion, relationship, and action. Without integration, awakening remains a vision, a glimpse of the mountaintop with no path to walk upon. The integration phase is that path, winding, unpredictable, and filled with the echoes of the old self still lingering in the corners of consciousness. At first, integration feels like confusion. You have seen through the illusion of identity, yet the world demands that you play a role. You know that everything is impermanent, yet you must pay bills, build relationships, and make choices as if permanence exists. The divine and the mundane no longer feel separate, but they do not yet feel harmonious. There is friction between your inner silence and outer responsibilities. You try to bring awareness into every act, but often find yourself slipping back into unconscious patterns. This dance between awareness and conditioning defines the early stages of integration. Integration demands humility. Awakening may reveal the vastness of consciousness, but integration reveals how fragile the human vessel still is. The mind retains habits of judgment, the body stores trauma, and the emotions still follow old rhythms. To integrate is to allow awareness to descend from the head into the heart, from the transcendent into the tangible. It is not about transcending humanity, but embracing it fully, living from truth, while still grounded in the imperfection of human experience. This descent can feel heavy because it calls you to face the parts of yourself that awakening did not erase. The unresolved wounds, the unhealed fears, the suppressed desires. During awakening, you may have felt detached from the world, floating in the vastness of being. Integration brings you back into contact with life. Relationships, work, family, and ordinary moments become the testing ground for truth. The ego that once dissolved begins to subtly reappear, not as an enemy, but as a necessary structure. You cannot function without some sense of individuality, but now it must operate under the guidance of awareness rather than control. The challenge is to engage with the world without being consumed by it, to act without attachment, to love without possession, to create without identification. The integration phase often reveals how spiritual realization can coexist with emotional immaturity. You may have touched the infinite, but parts of your psyche remain childlike, reactive, afraid. Awareness exposes these aspects without judgment, offering them the light they need to heal. The process is not glamorous, it is earthy and slow. You learn to listen to your body, to understand your emotions, to respect your limits. Integration means allowing awareness to inhabit every layer of your being, even the most human ones. This phase also redefines how you relate to others. Before awakening, relationships were built on need, projection, or validation. Now, those dynamics no longer feel sustainable. The old patterns of attachment begin to crumble, replaced by a quieter, freer form of connection. You no longer seek completion through others because you have seen the completeness within. Yet this realization can make relationships feel strange. Some fade away naturally, while others deepen in unexpected ways. Integration teaches that love is not a transaction but a mirror of consciousness, a way for awareness to meet itself in another form. Daily life becomes a meditation. The mundane acts, eating, walking, working, speaking, are no longer distractions from truth. They become its expression. You begin to sense that the divine is not hidden in distant experiences, but woven through every moment. Awareness starts to stabilize. Instead of fluctuating between highs of clarity and lows of confusion, you begin to carry stillness within movement. There is less need to retreat, less fear of losing yourself, because you realize that what you are cannot be lost. Yet integration is not linear. There are regressions, moments when old emotions resurface, when exhaustion sets in, when the simplicity of ordinary life feels unbearable after the vastness of awakening. The ego, though diminished, still whispers. It wants to claim awakening as an identity, to be the awakened one. Awareness exposes this subtle pride without condemnation. Each time you recognize it and let it go, integration deepens. Every return to humility allows truth to root itself more deeply into your humanity. As awareness stabilizes, compassion naturally arises. You begin to see the world not as broken, but as unconscious. You no longer feel the urge to fix others, but to understand them. The pain and confusion of humanity are no longer seen as obstacles to awakening, but as expressions of the same divine process you have gone through. You see your past struggles reflected in others, and empathy replaces judgment. This compassion is not sentimental. It is grounded in the recognition that awakening is not a personal achievement, but a collective unfolding of consciousness through countless forms. Integration also brings a shift in creativity and purpose. The drive to achieve for personal gain transforms into a quieter impulse to express truth. Whether through art, teaching, service, or simple presence, something within you begins to move outward, not for recognition, but as a natural overflow of being. There is no longer a need to impose meaning on life, because life itself has become meaningful. Every act, no matter how small, becomes part of the dance of awareness moving through form. Still, integration remains a living process. It does not end with mastery or perfection. It deepens endlessly as awareness continues to infuse the ordinary. Each challenge, each relationship, each moment of vulnerability becomes an invitation to embody truth more completely. The light of realization continues to penetrate the shadows of personality, transforming them from within, not through denial, but through gentle inclusion. Integration is not about escaping the world, but returning to it with eyes open, heart clear, and spirit grounded in silence after the collapse of illusions, after the silence of the void, and after the long labor of integration. Something subtle begins to awaken within, a quiet pulse that feels both ancient and new. It cannot be forced or summoned. It emerges naturally when the self stops searching for meaning outside itself. This is the birth of authentic meaning, not the kind built from belief or ambition, but the kind that rises spontaneously from the depths of being. It is not meaning as an idea, but meaning as a living presence. For much of life, meaning is borrowed. It comes from religion, success, relationships, or ideology. The human mind, uncomfortable with uncertainty, clings to these external structures to give purpose to existence. We measure worth through productivity, morality, or belonging. We strive to fit into systems that tell us what to value and how to live. Yet awakening dismantles these borrowed meanings, revealing their fragility. When the external scaffolding collapses, the question that once seemed simple, why am I here? It becomes unbearably vast. The mind, deprived of its old narratives, falls silent, and the heart stands before the mystery naked and trembling. At first, this emptiness feels like despair. Life appears meaningless, stripped of its familiar storylines. The goals that once inspired now seem hollow. The future loses its promise. But in the midst of this desolation, something begins to stir, not from thought, but from stillness. The awareness that survived the death of the old self begins to perceive life differently. It no longer asks for meaning, it begins to feel it. This meaning is not conceptual or emotional, it is experiential. It arises not from doing, but from being. Authentic meaning is not found through intellect, but through alignment. It emerges when one's inner state comes into harmony with the flow of existence. It does not depend on achievements, validation, or belief systems. It is not something you discover like a hidden treasure. It is something that reveals itself when the noise of the false self fades. The more silent the mind becomes, the more clearly this meaning radiates, quiet, steady, and unconditioned. This new sense of meaning is deeply intimate. It cannot be shared through words because it does not belong to the realm of thought. It is the meaning that exists in a single breath, in the sound of the wind, in the rhythm of being alive. It is simple and unadorned. It does not demand attention, it simply is. After awakening, when the personality has lost its direction and the ego no longer dictates purpose, this silent meaning begins to fill the empty space. It does not replace the old illusions, it dissolves the need for them. In the birth of authentic meaning, there is no longer a separation between sacred and ordinary. Everything becomes infused with quiet significance, not because it serves a higher purpose, but because it exists. Washing dishes, walking in the rain, sitting in silence, each act becomes whole in itself. The compulsion to reach for something more fades, replaced by a sense of deep participation in the unfolding of life. The smallest gesture holds the same weight as the grandest vision, because both arise from the same source of awareness. This authenticity cannot be taught, it can only be lived. The intellect may try to define it, but the moment it does, it turns into another borrowed belief. True meaning is born from direct experience. It comes through presence, through the surrender of resistance to what is. It reveals itself not when you ask life for answers, but when you stop demanding that life makes sense. In that surrender, the heart opens to a new kind of understanding, one that doesn't explain but illuminates. As authentic meaning unfolds, the relationship with suffering changes. Pain no longer feels like punishment or failure. It becomes part of the mysterious movement of life, expressing itself through form. Joy and sorrow lose their opposition, and become aspects of the same pulse of existence. You begin to sense that every experience, no matter how painful or mundane, carries within it the same silent essence. Meaning ceases to be something attached to outcomes and becomes something intrinsic to being itself. This stage of awakening also transforms how you relate to the collective world. You see how much of human suffering comes from the desperate attempt to invent meaning, to build empires of belief, to cling to ideologies, to find belonging in stories that divide. Having seen through this, you no longer seek to convert or convince. You move quietly through life, not as someone who knows, but as someone who sees. You understand that truth cannot be imposed. It must unfold within each consciousness in its own time. When authentic meaning takes root, life stops being a project to be completed and becomes a movement to be witnessed. You no longer chase purpose as something to achieve. You embody it as something to express. Action flows effortlessly from inner alignment. You help create or speak not out of compulsion, but out of natural resonance. Meaning expresses itself through you like breath, spontaneous, effortless, continuous. The need to justify existence dissolves because existence itself feels justified in every moment. Authentic meaning is inseparable from authenticity itself. It requires radical honesty, a willingness to see life without distortion. It asks you to live from the center, not from conditioning or expectation. This may look simple on the outside, but inwardly it is revolutionary. It means no longer living according to what the world demands, but according to what the moment reveals. It means trusting the intelligence of being more than the plans of the mind. In this state, gratitude becomes natural, not the gratitude of comparison. I am lucky because others suffer, but the gratitude of awareness. I am alive and that is enough. Each breath becomes a prayer without words. Each experience, pleasant or painful, becomes a reminder of presence. Authentic meaning does not eliminate struggle, but it transforms it into participation. You no longer feel separate from life's unfolding. You feel yourself as part of its continuous movement. Eventually, the question of meaning itself begins to dissolve. You realize that meaning was never something to be found, because it was never missing. It was only hidden beneath layers of expectation and fear. When those layers fall away, meaning stands revealed as the natural fragrance of consciousness. It is not something you seek or even understand. It is something you are. Life, once seen as a riddle to be solved, becomes a mystery to be lived.